Sir, you need to state your business or leave this courtroom. Marcus Webb didn't look up from his notepad. I'm a member of the public. I don't need business to sit in a public gallery. Deputy Bailiff Rick Sandoval had already crossed half the room to reach him, boots loud on the tile, one hand resting on his belt, like it needed reminding what it was for. Nobody sits in the front row and writes things down for no reason. I like the front row. Marcus kept his pen moving. Small, even letters. His grip tightened slightly around the barrel, the only sign that he'd clocked how fast this man had crossed the room. That was the part that unsettled Sandoval most, the calm. He'd spent 15 years reading rooms, and this man wasn't reading like anyone else in it. No fidgeting, no glancing at the exits. Just a grey suit, a leather case at his feet, and a pen that hadn't stopped since he'd taken his seat. An hour earlier, a one-line email had landed in every bailiff's inbox at the Fulton County Courthouse. Daughter's state auditor will be present in courtrooms today. Cooperate fully. Do not discuss. Nobody had explained what that meant. Sandoval had read it twice, then a third time, then deleted it. The way a man deletes a text he already knows he can't unsend from his own head. He'd had 3 complaints filed against him in 4 years. Excessive force. All 3 had disappeared into a filing cabinet in the chief clerk's office, the same office where he played golf on Sundays. He'd stopped thinking about them, the way you stop thinking about a debt you assume nobody's collecting. Then a black man in a charcoal suit walked in 20 minutes before docket call, sat in the front row of the gallery, and started writing. "Let me see some ID," Sandoval said. "I'm not required to carry identification to sit in a courtroom, Deputy. You're required if I ask. You're not required to ask, and I'm not required to answer." Marcus finally looked up. He took a short breath before he said the rest, the kind a man takes when he's deciding how much of what he actually thinks is worth saying out loud. "Is there a problem with where I'm sitting?" The gallery had started to notice. A woman 2 rows back lowered her phone from her lap, thumb hovering. A young man in a wrinkled sport coat, a juror, badge still clipped to his jacket from the morning's voir dire, sat up straighter, the way people do when the air in a room changes, before anyone said anything is wrong. "People come in here every day thinking they can sit wherever they want and watch whatever they want," Sandoval said, louder now, angled slightly so his voice carried past Marcus toward the rows behind him. "That's not how this works." "I'm aware of how a public gallery works. Are you?" Sandoval said it flat, not a question. He reached down and closed his hand around the strap of Marcus's briefcase, not lifting it, just holding it, the way you hold something to remind its owner it isn't really theirs to keep. What's in the bag? "Deputy, let go of my case." Marcus's eyes flicked once toward the courtroom doors, a half-second read of the exit, the first outward sign that some part of him understood exactly where this was heading. "Answer the question." "I'm not obligated to answer it, and you're not authorized to search it." A clerk near the bench had stopped typing. She glanced toward the judge's empty chair, then toward Sandoval, then back down at her keyboard. Sandoval let go of the case. Whatever hesitation he'd had was gone. "You know what I think," he said, to the gallery now as much as to Marcus. "I think we get people in here sometimes who think a suit and a notepad buys them the run of the place. I think you sat down there hoping nobody would ask. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened." Marcus set his pen down across the notepad, deliberately, the way a man sets something down when he intends to pick it back up in a moment. "Deputy Sandoval, you may want to check with the clerk's office before you go further with this." It was the only warning he gave. He didn't raise his voice to give it. He didn't repeat it. Sandoval heard a name he hadn't given. Marcus hadn't introduced himself to him. Not once, not this morning. And for half a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Then the gallery shifted again, waiting on him, watching him, and the question died before it became one. "On your feet," Sandoval said. "You're done here. I haven't done anything that requires me to leave." I said, "On your feet." Marcus stood, unhurried, and reached for the worn leather case he'd carried into this courthouse every morning for 6 weeks. The combination lock glinted briefly. Inside were 11 pages no one in the building wanted read aloud. Sandoval's hand closed around his collar before Marcus's fingers had fully closed around the handle. "Deputy." "Get out," Sandoval said, loud enough now that the whole gallery turned. loud enough that the words would still be repeated in that courthouse a week from now. "Get out." And then his boot was already moving. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more powerful justice stories like this one. Now, what happens next will change everything. Deputy Sandoval thinks he's throwing an ordinary man out of his courtroom. He has no idea who Marcus Webb really is. Let's continue. The boot caught Marcus mid-turn, and the room tilted. He hit the aisle floor on his shoulder, the leather case skidding from his hand and cracking open against a bench leg. Papers slid loose across the tile, not the 11 pages, those were still locked, but a scattering of loose notes, appointment slips, a business card face up beside his knee. Nobody in the gallery moved to read it. Nobody needed to. What they were watching had already stopped being about paperwork. Deputy, the clerk near the bench, was on her feet now, one hand half raised, the word dying before it became a sentence. Sandoval didn't look at her. He hauled Marcus up by the collar, hard enough that Marcus's tie twisted sideways, and started walking him toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. "You don't get to write me up in my own courtroom," Sandoval said, low, meant for Marcus alone. "Whatever this is, it's not happening on my floor. I never said I was writing you up." Marcus's voice hadn't broken register, even folded half sideways under Sandoval's grip. "You decided that yourself. That should have stopped him. It didn't." A decision like this one doesn't reverse itself once the room is watching, and by now the entire gallery was watching, 12 jurors included. The presiding judge's bench still empty because docket call hadn't started. No one with the authority to intervene yet in the room at all. The juror in the wrinkled sport coat stood halfway out of his seat, hand half extended like he meant to say something, then didn't. He sat back down. He would remember, later, that he'd almost said something and hadn't, and the memory would sit in him worse than if he'd simply stayed silent from the start. Sandoval kicked the double doors open with his boot and shoved Marcus through them onto the marble landing outside. The doors swung shut on the sound of a courtroom exhaling, a low, collective murmur, the particular silence of a room deciding, individually and all at once, that this wasn't theirs to fix. Marcus caught himself against the wall outside, one hand flat on cold stone, breathing through the sting in his shoulder. His jacket had torn at the seam. His notepad was still on the courtroom floor. Sandoval stood in the doorway, chest still working from the effort, and for the first time something crossed his face that wasn't certainty. It was there and gone in under a second, long enough for Marcus to see it, too brief for Sandoval to notice he'd shown it. "Don't come back in," Sandoval said. "Not today." "I'll be back," Marcus said. Not a threat. A fact, delivered the way you tell someone what time a train left. Sandoval let the doors swing shut between them. Marcus didn't sit down on the courthouse steps. He didn't call security, didn't ask to speak to a supervisor, didn't raise his voice to the two attorneys who'd stepped past him on their way in and out without breaking stride. He straightened his jacket, as best the torn seam allowed, picked his notepad up from just inside the doors where it had slid, and walked to the parking structure across the street. His car was a grey sedan, nothing that announced itself. He unlocked the trunk and lifted out a second case, smaller than the one still lying open on the courtroom floor, a hard-shell box with a combination lock of its own. He didn't open it yet. He set it on the passenger seat, closed the door, and dialed a number he hadn't needed to use in 6 weeks. "This is Webb." A pause while the line connected. "I need you to pull the Sandoval file." "All of it. The 3 prior complaints, the clerk's office correspondence, everything we've built since March." Another pause, longer. "No, he doesn't know yet. That's the point." He hung up before whoever was on the other end could ask the obvious question, "Are you all right?" Because the honest answer would have taken longer than he wanted to give it. And there wasn't time today for anything that didn't move the file forward. He looked back across the street at the courthouse. 4 wide stone steps, brass-handled double doors, a building that had swallowed men like Sandoval's mistake for 15 years without once being made to answer for it. Somewhere inside, docket call had probably already started without him. He didn't go back in yet. He sat in the driver's seat, opened the hard-shell case on the passenger side, and began reading. Not the file he already knew by heart, but the newest page in it, the one he'd need before he walked back through those doors. A single line near the bottom of the page would matter more than anything Sandoval had said to him that morning. Prior use of force incident. Same courtroom, 11 months ago. Complainant withdrew after being informed the case would go nowhere. He read it twice, the way a man reads something he already suspected, but needed confirmed in writing. Inside, the courtroom had settled back into its rhythm faster than it should have. Docket call proceeded. The clerk, who'd half risen from her chair, sat through 3 case names without hearing any of them, her eyes returning again and again to the spot on the tile where Marcus's papers had scattered. Sandoval resumed his post at the side door, jaw tight, badge straightened, telling himself the morning was already behind him. It wasn't. Word travels through a courthouse faster than any docket. By the time the lunch recess was called, 2 clerks in the records office were already trading versions of what they'd heard, and one of them mentioned, almost in passing, that she thought she recognized the name on the business card that had fallen out of the man's briefcase. She hadn't said it to Sandoval. She wasn't planning to. But she'd said it to someone, and in a building that size, that was almost the same thing as saying it to everyone. Marcus looked back at the courthouse. 4 stone steps, brass doors, 15 years of complaints disappearing behind them. Somewhere inside, docket call had already begun without him. Marcus stopped on 1 sentence, read it again, then a 3rd time. The number Marcus had dialed from the parking structure belonged to a woman named Angela Reyes, Deputy Director of the State's Commission on Judicial and Court Officer Conduct. She picked up on the 2nd ring, this time already mid-sentence. Tell me you're not still sitting in that courtroom. I'm not in the courtroom. Marcus kept his eyes on the courthouse doors across the street. I'm in my car with a torn jacket and a business card that fell out of my case in front of 24 witnesses. A pause. How bad? Physical removal. Collar, not cuffs. Gallery saw all of it. He didn't editorialize past that. He never did. I need everything we have on Sandoval before I go back in. Not the summary, the full file. Marcus, you don't need the full file. You've read it 11 times. I need it because I'm not the one who has to believe it anymore. He said it flatly, the way he said most things that mattered most to him. Somebody in that building is about to. The commission had opened the file on Rick Sandoval in March, after the 3rd complaint arrived within 4 years, not filed by a defendant, not by a witness, but by a fellow deputy who'd quietly transferred to another county rather than keep working the same floor. That complaint hadn't gone anywhere either. It had landed on the same desk the first 2 had, in an office where the chief clerk kept a framed photo of himself and Sandoval at a charity golf tournament. And it had died there the way the others had, reclassified, deprioritized, eventually closed as insufficient corroboration. What made this file different was the 11 pages Marcus had built since. Not complaints, patterns, dates cross-referenced against courthouse security logs the clerk's office hadn't known were backed up externally. A withdrawn statement from 11 months ago, the one Marcus had read 3 times sitting in his car. A man had been forcibly removed from that same courtroom, who'd started the process of filing, and who'd stopped after someone in the clerk's office told him, according to his own written account, that pursuing it further would make things harder for him going forward. Marcus had spent 6 weeks confirming that sentence had actually been said, by whom and why. Marcus wasn't a lawyer, and he wasn't law enforcement. His authority came from somewhere less visible and, in this courthouse, far more dangerous, the power to recommend that a judge lose the bench and a bailiff lose his commission. He reached for the glove box. It was a small motion, almost automatic. He hadn't needed to open it that morning. He needed to now. Inside, beneath a folded map and an expired parking permit, sat a laminated card he'd carried in there for 6 weeks without once having to use it. He lifted it out, turned it over once in his fingers, and looked at it for longer than the moment strictly required. State seal at the top, his photo beneath it. Beneath that, in plain black text, Marcus T.W.E.B., Senior Investigator, Commission on Judicial and Court Officer Conduct. He clipped it to his breast pocket, over the tear in his jacket, and checked himself once in the rearview mirror. Not his appearance, just confirmation that the man in the glass matched the man on the card. Then he got out of the car. The courthouse metal detector sat just inside the main entrance, manned by a younger deputy Marcus hadn't spoken to that morning, a stocky man named Perkins, who'd been on his phone when Marcus first walked through 2 hours earlier, and hadn't looked up then. He looked up now. His eyes went to the badge on Marcus's chest before they reached his face, and something in his posture changed, the way a man's posture changes when a routine morning stops being routine. He set the phone down. "Sir, Perkins started, then stopped himself, recalibrating. "Mr. Webb, I didn't realize. You didn't need to." Marcus kept walking, unhurried, the way he'd walked into every building he'd ever needed to walk back into. "Is Judge Alvarez in chambers?" Yes, sir. Docket south, on a short recess." "Good." Marcus stopped, just for a second, close enough that Perkins could see the small tear at the shoulder seam of his jacket. "Deputy Sandoval still on courtroom 4? Perkins's throat worked once before he answered, "Far as I know." "Then I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention I'm back yet." It wasn't a threat. Marcus never made those. But Perkins nodded like it was one anyway, and reached for his radio, and then set it back down without touching the button. The first small choice, of many that would be made in that building over the next hour. To do the harder right thing, instead of the easier familiar one. Marcus crossed the lobby toward the judicial chambers hallway, the same corridor he'd have needed a different kind of authority to walk down that morning. Behind him, at the records desk, the clerk who'd seen the business card fall from his case that morning, looked up, saw the badge and went very still. She didn't call out to him. She didn't need to. She'd already told 2 people what she thought she'd recognized on that card, and by lunch that number would be 4. Marcus reached the door marked, "Chambers, Hon. R. Alvarez," and raised his hand to knock. Behind him, 30 feet down the hall, a side door swung open, and Deputy Sandoval stepped out mid-conversation with another bailiff, laughing at something, his morning already folded away and forgotten. He hadn't seen Marcus yet. He was about to. Sandoval's laugh died somewhere in his throat. He was still turning out of the side hallway when he saw the badge, not Marcus's face first. The badge. The way people who spend their careers reading rooms often clock the wrong detail first because it's the one that changes everything. His hand found the door frame beside him without him deciding to reach for it. He stopped, started again. "That's not Marcus Webb." He said it plainly, the way he'd have said it 2 hours earlier if anyone had bothered to ask. "Senior investigator, Commission on Judicial and Court Officer Conduct." The other bailiff beside Sandoval took a half step back, the kind of step a man takes when he realizes he doesn't want to be standing this close to whatever's about to happen. "I want to see that." Sandoval's voice had gone tight, still trying to sound like a man in control of the hallway. "You'll see the letter." Marcus didn't reach for anything. It was mailed to the clerk's office 3 weeks ago. "You can ask why nobody told you it arrived." Sandoval's jaw worked. Something crossed his face, not yet fear, still something closer to disbelief, the look of a man doing fast arithmetic and not liking any of the numbers. "This is about the email. The Auditor thing. It's about 11 months ago," Marcus said, "and it's about this morning." For a moment, neither of them moved. Down the hall, the clerk who'd recognized the business card had come out from behind the records desk under the pretense of refiling something, close enough to hear, not close enough to be accused of listening. "Whatever you think you saw," Sandoval started. "I don't think anything, Deputy. I was there." Marcus's tone didn't rise. It never had, not once that morning, and the flatness of it now did more damage than shouting could have. "You put your hands on me in front of a gallery, a jury pool, and a courtroom clerk, 20 minutes after being told a state investigator would be present today. That's not a misunderstanding I need to interpret. That's a decision you made." Sandoval's hand had curled at his side. He didn't raise it. He was, Marcus noted, still capable of that much restraint, which meant everything that had happened that morning hadn't been a loss of control. It had been a choice, made in full possession of his faculties, against a man who'd given him every reasonable chance to make a different one. "I want a union rep," Sandoval said. "Before anything else happens, you'll have one." Marcus's eyes moved past him, toward the chamber's door. "That's Judge Alvarez's decision to arrange, not mine." The knock Marcus had never finished delivering came now. 3 even raps against the chamber's door, and Judge Renata Alvarez opened it herself before her clerk could reach it. She was a compact woman in her 50s, reading glasses pushed up into grey hair, and she took in the scene in front of her, the badge, the torn jacket seam, Sandoval's rigid posture, the small crowd of clerks that had begun assembling at a distance that pretended not to be listening. In under 2 seconds, Mr. Webb. She said his name like she already knew it, which she did. Every judge on this floor had received the same one-line email that morning, though none of them had known what it meant until now. I take it this couldn't wait for docket recess. It couldn't wait for lunch, Your Honor. Marcus's voice hadn't changed for her the way it might have for someone trying to impress. I need 10 minutes, and I need Deputy Sandoval relieved of his post while we have the... Alvarez's eyes went to Sandoval. Whatever she saw in his face, the tightness at his jaw, the stillness that wasn't calm so much as a man refusing to let his hands do anything that could be used against him, she'd clearly seen something like it before, on other faces. In other circumstances she hadn't wanted to believe either. Deputy Sandoval, she said, hand your radio to Perkins and wait in the officer's room. Your Honor, with respect, you have a right to a union representative and a right to due process, Alvarez said, both of which you'll get. What you don't have as of this moment is a post in my courtroom. Her voice didn't rise either. Marcus recognized the register, the same discipline he'd spent all morning practicing, worn by someone who'd clearly needed it in that building for a lot longer than he had. Sandoval unclipped his radio. His hand, Marcus noticed, wasn't entirely steady doing it, the first outward crack in a morning that had otherwise held. He didn't look at Marcus again before he walked toward the officer's room. He didn't need to. Whatever certainty had carried him through the last 2 hours had gone somewhere else, and what was left in its place hadn't caught up to him yet. Alvarez waved Marcus into her chambers and closed the door behind them both. 11 pages, she said, without preamble, nodding at the case Marcus set on her desk. That's what I'm told this is. 11 pages, 3 prior complaints, and a withdrawn statement from a man who was told pursuing it would make things harder for him. Marcus opened the case. I need to know who told him that, Your Honor, because it wasn't Deputy Sandoval who had the authority to make that promise. Alvarez didn't answer right away. She picked up the first page, read the first line, and her expression didn't change, which told Marcus more than if it had. You'll want to sit down for the rest of it, Marcus said. Outside, in the hallway, the clerk who'd been pretending to refile paperwork finally stopped pretending, walked back to her desk, and picked up her phone. Not to call Sandoval this time, but to call someone in the chief clerk's office, to warn them, or perhaps, for the first time that morning, to tell the truth to someone who could still stop it from getting worse. She hadn't decided which yet. She had about 10 minutes left to. The clerk's name was Renee Ford. She'd worked records at that courthouse for 9 years, and in 9 years she had never once called the number now lit up on her phone screen. Not the chief clerk's office, but the state ethics line printed on a poster in the break room nobody read. She stared at it for 4 rings before she pressed call. I need to report something, she said when the line connected. About a complaint that was withdrawn last year. I think I know why. The voice on the other end asked her to hold, and Renee sat with the phone against her ear, watching the records office go on exactly as it had every other Tuesday. Printers running, a phone ringing at the next desk. Nobody aware that the floor beneath the last 15 years had just started to shift. Marcus was still in the parking structure when Angela Reyes called him back. You need to hear this in person, she said. Alvarez wants you in chambers in 20 minutes. Somebody just walked into the ethics line. Who? A clerk. She says she remembers the exact conversation the withdrawn complainant described in his statement, word for word, Marcus. She says she was standing 3 feet away when it happened. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. 6 weeks of cross-reference security logs and reclassified complaints had gotten him this far on inference and pattern. A witness who'd actually heard it happen was a different category of evidence entirely, the kind that didn't need 3 more weeks of corroboration to hold up. Does she know who she's implicating? He asked. She used his name herself. Nobody had to ask her. Renee sat across from Judge Alvarez an hour later, hands folded in her lap, and told the story in the plain, unadorned way people tell the truth when they've finally decided the cost of silence is worse than the cost of speaking. 11 months earlier, a man named Thomas Rayner had been removed from courtroom 4 by Deputy Sandoval, grabbed, walked out, the same as Marcus, though nobody outside the building had ever heard his name. Rayner had come back the next day to file a complaint. Renee had been at the front desk when the chief clerk intercepted him before the paperwork reached anyone else. He told Mr. Rayner that filing it would make things harder for him going forward, Renee said. I remember because Mr. Rayner asked him what that meant, and he didn't answer. He just repeated it, slower. And Mr. Rayner withdrew the complaint, Alvarez said. 3 days later. I don't know what happened in between. I only know he stopped coming to the courthouse after that, even for his own hearings. Someone else had to be assigned his case. Marcus, seated by the window, wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. He'd read the sentence in Rayner's withdrawn statement 3 times in his car 2 days earlier, and hearing it now, confirmed independently by someone with nothing to gain from saying it, felt less like new information than like a door finally closing all the way. Why now? Alvarez asked her. You've carried this a long time. Renee looked toward the window, not at Marcus, not quite at anyone. Because 2 days ago I watched it happen again, to a different man, and I told myself the same thing I told myself the first time. That it wasn't my place. Her voice didn't break, but it came close. I don't believe that anymore. The chief clerk was summoned to chambers without being told why. Marcus watched him walk in, a heavy-set man named Douglas Farrow, tie loosened, the easy stride of someone who'd spent 15 years assuming rooms like this one belonged to him by default. That confidence lasted until Alvarez set Renee's statement on the desk in front of him, face up, and said nothing at all. Farrow read the first line, then the second. Marcus watched something in his face try to arrange itself into outrage and fail, the way a man's expression fails when the thing he's protesting is something he actually did. This is one person's memory of a private conversation, Farrow said. That's not evidence of anything. It matches Mr. Rayner's withdrawn statement almost word for word, Alvarez said, independently, before either of them could have compared notes. I don't recall the conversation happening that way. You don't recall it happening at all, Mr. Farrow, or you recall it happening differently? Farrow didn't answer. It was, Marcus thought, the first honest thing he'd communicated since walking into the room. The silence said what the denial hadn't. I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective this afternoon, Alvarez said. Pending a full review by the commission. Mr. Webb will need your cooperation, not your objections. Farrow looked at Marcus for the first time since entering the room. Really looked, the way a man looks at someone he's finally forced to take seriously. Whatever he saw in Marcus's face wasn't triumph. It was simply attention, steady and unhurried. The same attention Marcus had given every piece of paper in that file for 6 weeks. You've been building this the whole time, Farrow said. It wasn't quite a question. Since March, Marcus said. He had chances to stop it before it reached this room. So did Deputy Sandoval. Farrow's jaw tightened, but there was nothing left to argue. He stood, buttoned his jacket out of habit rather than dignity, and walked out without another word. Past Renee, who didn't look away from him, past the records desk he'd controlled for 15 years. And out through the front doors he'd have to request permission to use again. Word reached Sandoval before Marcus did. By the time Marcus found him in the officer's room, Sandoval already knew about Farrow, and something in that knowledge had hollowed him out in a way the badge on Marcus's chest alone hadn't managed to 2 days earlier. He told me it would be handled, Sandoval said. Not quite to Marcus, not quite to himself. Every time. He always said it would be handled. It was, Marcus said. Just not the way you were told. Sandoval sat with that for a long moment, and when he finally looked up, there was nothing left of the man who'd kicked open a courtroom's double doors 2 days before. No certainty, no performance. Just the flat exhaustion of someone realizing how much of his career had been built on someone else absorbing the consequences for him. What happens now? He asked. Now, Marcus said. You find out whether you're the kind of person who can admit what you did, without someone forcing you to. He didn't wait for an answer. There wasn't one Sandoval could give yet that would mean anything. Marcus hadn't planned to come back for docket call the next morning. He came anyway, because the file wasn't fully closed until he'd watched the room right itself with his own eyes. He walked through the same double doors Sandoval had kicked him through 3 mornings earlier. Same grey suit, jacket seam mended, briefcase repaired and locked. He took the same seat in the front row he'd taken the first time, and for a moment nothing in the room acknowledged that anything unusual had happened at all. Attorneys arranged files. A clerk who wasn't Renee typed at the records desk. It looked, for a few seconds, exactly like a Tuesday. Then the juror in the wrinkled sport coat, seated in the gallery for a case that hadn't yet resumed, stood up. He didn't say anything. There was no procedure that called for it. Docket call hadn't started. No clerk had asked the room to rise. He simply stood, the way a person stands for something they wish they'd stood for the first time, and looked toward the front row where Marcus sat with his notepad open. For a moment, it was just the two of them. One standing, one seated. 3 days of silence between them finally answered. Then the woman beside him rose. Then the man 2 seats down. It moved through the gallery the way something moves when nobody wants to be the last person still sitting. Not performance, not spectacle, just an entire room quietly correcting something it hadn't had the courage to correct in real time. Judge Alvarez, entering from chambers, took in the room and didn't call for order. She let it happen. Marcus sat still through it, notepad in his lap, and didn't stand to acknowledge it, didn't nod, didn't do anything that might have turned the moment into something about him rather than about what it actually was. A room admitting, 3 days too late, that it had known better and hadn't acted on it. When the gallery settled back into their seats, Alvarez spoke for the first time. Before we resume the calendar, she said, "The court has an administrative matter to close on the record." She looked toward the back of the room, toward Renee, standing near the doorway where she'd stopped to watch. "Ms. Ford, will you step forward?" Renee did, hands folded, the same posture she'd carried into chambers the day before. "The court wishes to note, for the record, that your statement was instrumental in correcting a pattern of misconduct that predates your employment here by several years," Alvarez said. "That took courage most people in your position never find. This court is grateful you found it." Renee didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter than it had been in chambers. "I should have found it sooner." "You found it," Alvarez said. "That's what the record will show." Later that morning, Marcus received a call he'd been waiting 6 weeks to make. Thomas Rayner picked up on the third ring, wary, the voice of a man who'd learned not to expect good news from unfamiliar numbers. "Mr. Rayner, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm with the State Commission on Judicial and Court Officer Conduct. I'm calling about the complaint you withdrew last year." Silence on the line, long enough that Marcus almost repeated himself. "Nobody's called me about that in 11 months. Rayner finally said. "I know. I'm sorry it took this long. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. The complaint's being reopened, and this time it's not going to disappear into a filing cabinet." "You were right, Mr. Rayner. About what happened, and about why nobody helped you." Another silence, shorter this time. "Somebody finally believes me. They should have believed you the first time," Marcus said. "That's on the building, not on you." The suspensions became permanent by the end of the month. Sandoval surrendered his commission rather than contest the licensing board's findings. Farrer resigned before the commission's report was finalized, which changed nothing about what the report said. The courthouse instituted a new verification and complaint escalation policy within 6 weeks, one that routed every citizen complaint against courthouse personnel directly to an outside reviewer, bypassing the local chain of command entirely. Every new deputy who completes intake training at that courthouse now reviews an anonymized version of the case. Most of them don't know the man in the file is real. A few have asked. Marcus has never confirmed it either way, not out of secrecy, but because the point was never supposed to be about him. He stopped by the courthouse steps one last time before closing the file for good. The same 4 stone steps, the same brass-handled doors, though they looked different to him now than they had 3 mornings earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with the building itself. A woman was helping an elderly man up the steps beside him, patient, unhurried, the kind of small, ordinary kindness that never makes it into any file. Marcus watched them reach the top and go inside, and thought, not for the first time, that this was usually what dignity looked like when nobody was being tested. Quiet, unremarkable, assumed. It was only in its absence that anyone noticed it was missing at all. He walked up the same steps, through the same doors, into a building that had finally, if only for now, become what the words carved over its entrance had always claimed it was. Some places don't earn the words written above their doors. They just wait for someone to hold them to it. Have you ever watched someone get underestimated by everyone in the room, right up until the moment the room found out exactly who they were? Tell us below. And if this story stayed with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that quiet dignity outlasts loud arrogance every single time.